Good evening and welcome to the Waltham Public Library. My name is Deborah Hoffman and I organize programs and events here. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This program, like all of our programs, is sponsored by the Friends of the Waltham Public Library, so please join the Friends. Before we start, I ask that you please silence your cell phones right now. And I do want to let you know that this presentation is being filmed by WCAC and will be shown at a later date on the Waltham channel. Tonight you'll hear from three speakers, Steve Goodwin, Dr. Jack Cox, and Jimmy Auld. Together, they have over 120 years of service to the people of Waltham. And now it's time for Wicked Waltham. Please join me in welcoming Steve Goodwin.
Hi, again, I'm very pleased so many of you could make it out. It was a terrible day today. We decided we'd have it in this venue. Again, we love the library. We love to expose people to the programs that go on here. A month ago, I was here for Ann Cleves, the author of the Shetland books and the Vera books. It's wonderful, the programs they put on every week here. Tonight, we've got two new presenters compared to the Wicked Waltham. One we did a couple months ago. We're going to be joined by Jim Auld from the Waltham Police Department, retired detective, and we're going to be joined by Jack Cox, who will go first. Jack has 43 years in the Waltham system. I had 44, so I am senior in that respect. But he will surpass me, I'm sure. We're going after Margaret Nolan's record of 55 years or whatever it was. Jack teaches the Waltham course. He started that, Waltham History course, U.S. History AP at Waltham High School. And he's an author of at least one book, Waltham's Industrial History, and he's contributed to others. And he'll present our first case. I am jealous. He has the most salacious case of them all. He gets the prize case because it is Crimes of Passion tonight. Jack?
Yeah, you're not going to get the X version of this case. It's going to be very, very toned down. This case here, the Clarence Glover murder, this is Waltham's most celebrated murder case, murder mystery. It was front page news in the Boston newspapers for weeks. It was covered all over the country. Mr. Goodwin sometimes calls it's Waltham's version of the Lizzie Borden case. And it involved wealthy people, it involved girlfriends, it has everything to make for a great story. But first, I'd like to just take a look at, it takes place in 1909. What was Waltham like in 1909? So, just to kind of set the tone, this is a picture of Main Street. This is a street that Mr. Glover lived on, Mr. and Mrs. Glover. And you might recognize the Mercantile building over there on the left. You'll notice there's no cars in the picture. Waltham, people own cars, they're very wealthy. But you see a trolley and a horse and wagon here. But that would be Central Square in Waltham, the Common over there on the left. And Moody Street was Waltham Shopping District. You'll recognize the Cleaners, Queen Cleaners on the left, same building. And this is in a pickle. And that's actually it's the oldest commercial building on Moody Street. It was built in 1869. It's the same building, it was just bricked over. So that is the oldest commercial building standing on Moody Street. And you look at Main Street, it was a dirt road. They used to occasionally cover the dirt in oil to keep the dust down. But this is the corner of Elm and Main Street. This is Rumford Hall, it's called. This was Waltham's Town Hall, Waltham City Hall, right up until 1926. And whenever I look at this, I always think it looks so old and so Western. And my dad was born in 1921, and he remembered this. And when he used to tell me that, I'd say, it just seems so long ago for Waltham to have looked like this. But that's Waltham's Town Hall. The mayor at the time was Mayor Edward Walker, who I'll mention later on. Waltham was still a working class town. A lot of people were still working at the Boston Manufacturing Company mill on Moody Street, still standing today. I think we missed one. And the biggest factory in Waltham, Waltham's blue collar, the American Waltham Watch Company, the largest watch company in the world. Once again, notice the lack of cars. You had trolleys on Crescent Street, but it was in its heyday in 1909. For recreation, it was a river. So on a hot summer day, there'd be people canoeing, hundreds of people. There are photographs with hundreds of canoes on the river, people swimming down at Forest Grove. The dance hall hadn't opened yet. Nutting's Dance Hall hadn't opened. That'll open in 1914. And for the adventurous kids, they could go over to Cornelia Warren's estate. Cornelia Warren was still alive. She'll die in 1921. And she had built a maze. And when she was a young girl, she went to England. She saw a maze that she really liked, and she duplicated it on Beaver Street in Waltham. And that was open to the public. And for Waltham High School's teenagers who were still in school, who hadn't dropped out to work, they were going to Waltham High School. It was a state-of-the-art school. It was built in 1902. So at the time of the Glover murder, this is 7 years old. You'll notice on the left, Waltham Trade School. And I'll be mentioning the football team. This is the 1906 Waltham High School football team. And then as now, Waltham has always been a football town. I think we always will be. And the games, not at Leary Field, they were played at Central Park down on Grove Street. Okay, and now we get to the main characters in the murder. This is Clarence Glover. In 1909, he was 46 years old. He was married. He had a reputation for being a ladies' man. He was a philanderer. He was well known around town. His family was one of the most prominent families in Waltham at the time. He was earning in his business $1,000 a month. And before I came here, I put that in an inflation calculator to see what that would equal today. It's the equivalent today, $1,000 a month, of $28,000 a month. So we're looking at a man who's making about $300,000, the equivalent, a year. Not a great picture, but this is his wife, Lillian. 10 years younger, she was 35 years old. You probably can't tell by this, but she was considered very attractive. She came from Nova Scotia. Her maiden name, interestingly enough, was LeBlanc. She came from a little town, West Arishat, in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia. She comes to Waltham and she marries Clarence. And like many rich families, they had a maid. And the maid's name, she's a 15-year-old girl. Her name is also LeBlanc, Hattie, Henrietta LeBlanc. She came from West Arishat. She did not speak English. She came to Waltham. She lived with the family. She was paid, what do you think they paid her a week? $2. So she was making $2 a week as the live-in maid for the Glover family. And you might recognize this. This is the Glover estate. It's still standing today. So if you know where Sal's Pizza used to be, if you were standing right in front of Sal's and go down to the left, there's a little condo development there. There's a Greek Revival house with columns in the front, and then there's some condos behind it. And over to the left, you'll see this building. And this was an impressive house to live in. It's at 428 Main Street. The Glovers lived there with the maid. They had a bunch of dogs. They had a car, which was unusual. It was a Winton 6 touring car. They had taken a trip to Jamaica on a vacation. They had a horse and carriage, so they were living the good life. And this is the scene of the murder. This is the Waltham Laundry. If you know where Cronins Landing is, this was in Cronins parking lot. So right here, you'd be on the other side of the river. You're looking over at Grover Cronins, where the parking lot used to be. And this was a Waltham Laundry. And you can see it was, look at how it goes all the way down to the end of the picture. It was a large building. Okay, and I have to give you a few dates here of what happened so you get the sequence on the murder. On March 20th, 1909, Lillian Glover is at home. She enters a bathroom on the second floor of her house. She walks in on her husband with the maid. They are in a compromising position. This will become known in the trial as the incident in the bathroom. That's how they refer to it. And what does Lillian do? Lillian pushes the maid aside, lunges at her husband, and starts pummeling him. And she's pounding on him, and he is begging for forgiveness. He is saying it will never happen again. He's crying. So that happens on March 20th. The following day, March 21st, Lillian goes to Boston, and she visits a sporting goods store. Do you want to take a guess what she's looking for? She buys a gun, and the sales slip of the gun will be introduced at the trial. She buys the gun, and she says to the clerk who will testify at the trial, "Will this kill a man?" Okay, a few days after this, April 1909, so the incident in the bathroom is March 20th. April 1909, the maid, Hattie LeBlanc, is allowed back into the house. So she moves back in with them. And then all seems well. So it's April, May, June, July. We go to November 20th, 1909. Waltham High School has a football game on that day. We're playing Cambridge. It's down at Old Central Park where Standard Thompson used to be. And Waltham wins 26-0. We always beat Cambridge, right, Jim? So things never change. And it's said afterward that who went to the game, Mr. and Mrs. Glover and the maid, and she was very quiet. She wasn't saying anything. She wasn't herself. Why? Well, was it on her mind that she had a date that night? And her date was with Clarence. And they were going to meet at the Waltham Laundry. They go home after the game. They have dinner at 428 Main Street. And after dinner, Clarence says to his wife, "I have to go down to the laundry to take care of business." And Hattie cleans up, she does the dishes, and then by this time she's 16, and she tells Mrs. Glover, "I'm going into Boston." And of course she's not, she goes down to the Waltham Laundry. She meets Clarence in his office. Clarence had a gun with him. He puts the gun on his desk. They have a blanket on the floor, and they're together on the blanket, talking about the game. And it's dark, it's pitch dark, and the maid, Hattie, she hears rustling. She'll say afterward it was like a dress. She heard a woman's dress. She hears rustling. She gets scared. She runs. 2 shots are fired. Clarence is wounded. He's hit in the hand, he's hit in the shoulder, and he's hit in the back. From there, the maid is taken off. She's heading towards the river, people said afterward. Clarence crawls from the Waltham Laundry. Now picture this, the parking lot of Cronins. He crawls across Crescent Street to right behind where In a Pickle is, and there was a doctor there. His name was Dr. Cousins. It's referred to in all of the stories as Dr. Cousins Hospital. I have never heard of that, but it was a medical office. He's on the front step. He's been shot. He's dying there, and he's yelling for help. A woman discovers him. She calls the police. The doctor brings him inside. Officer Tully shows up, and Officer Tully says, "Who shot you?" And this is what he said: "Hattie shot me." And then he said, "It's all up for me. I'm done." He's asked, "Well, why did she shoot you?" And he said, "I don't know. She had an insane look in her eye." Mrs. Glover is called, and she's asked to come down, and she does. She stays for a few minutes in the waiting room. She doesn't go in and see her husband. She says it would be too upsetting. She leaves, and she says, if If he dies or if he says anything about me, let me know. She leaves. Kind of unusual. Clarence then says, and this is really important, Clarence says, and the policeman's there, if they don't operate on me soon, I'm gone. So in other words, at first he said, I think I'm dying, but now he's saying, if they don't operate on me soon, I'm gone. At midnight, he's dead. They call Mrs. LeBlanc, Lillian. When told of the death, she said, did he say anything about me? Okay, so to give you an idea, this is a picture I've had, and I dug it out. To give you an idea, this is a wealthy company, Waltham Laundry Trucks. I don't know how many he owned, but to have a business back then with 3 trucks was impressive. So now, what happened to Henrietta? What happened to Hattie? Whole story not told yet. This is from the Globe. Glover case a mystery, no trace of her. Not believe she took her own life. So where could she be? Okay? Police do not believe her body is in the river. They're very important. Here's an advertisement for Waltham. When Steve gave me some of these clippings, that was the thing I was most interested in, was the ad for Waltham Watch. Okay? So what do? They're looking for the boy. They cannot find what happened to this 16-year-old girl. They dragged the river. If you look at this, this is Cronins Landing. Some of you might remember the old 105 Club, the Middlesex Hotel right there. I think it burned down in 1972. His Boston Manufacturing Company. You're looking at Charles and Felton over there. They dragged the river from the Moody Street Bridge down to Norumbega. And they're looking for the body. Nothing shows up. 1,000 people lined the river looking, to watch this. This was big stuff. So all these people are showing up watching it. Okay? And then they find her. Okay. LeBlanc girl is arrested. And they had searched the house twice. And then the police decide, let's search 428 Main Street again. They look in Clarence's bedroom, and she's under the bed. Now, this is 3 days afterward. They find her under the bed. They described her as a frightened bird. She was disheveled. Remember, she's a teenage girl. She's very petite, by the way. She looked disheveled. She was upset. She was under the bed. And they bring her to the Waltham Police Station. You might recognize this, the Waltham Museum. So this had been built in 1890. Here's the Waltham Police Station right on Lexington Street. And who's there? The mayor. Now, the mayor is not a lawyer, but he's here to question her, which is kind of interesting. The police chief is here. The police chief was McKenna Field, Cacciatore Field, Babe Ruth Field. 2 attorneys are there. Not her lawyers, Lillian Glover's. Mrs. Glover's lawyers are there to watch the whole thing. And in a nutshell, she says here, I didn't shoot him. I didn't do it. Okay. And I'm going to go through this quickly in the interest of time, but 7 people were arrested, and they were arrested for being accessories to the murder, accessory after the fact. They were accused of hiding Lillian after the murder, and that included Mrs. Glover. Say it again?
Hiding Hattie.
I'm sorry, hiding Hattie after the murder. Yeah. So go ahead. I like this picture here. So this is this trial's not going anywhere, but they're trying the 7 people accused of hiding her, and the newspaper lists who they are. And way over on the far left, that's Lillian Glover. That's Mrs. Glover. And the thing I like about it, if you look carefully at this, it just makes her look evil. She's wearing a black veil. Okay. And that's still, this case, they'll all be acquitted. This case doesn't go anywhere. Okay, and now the big case. So the LeBlanc case begins. LeBlanc trial jurymen on the way to dinner. They're showing everyone, notice they're all men. Here's the foreman, imagine doing that today. They're showing who's on the jury. and his little Hattie LeBlanc being escorted to the trial. Hold on one sec. Okay, this is going to be what the prosecution is going to argue. They're going to say that she shot Clarence Glover. The evidence that they want to present. First of all, they want to present Glover's dying declaration. When he was asked by Officer Tully who did it, he said, Hattie LeBlanc, she had an insane look. That's what they want. They know who did it. They know that she did it. However, that is never allowed in court. Why? Because it was not a dying declaration. Afterward, he said, I might live. If he thinks he's going to live, he has a reason to lie. So the jury never hears the confession. They never hear the statement by Clarence Glover that I was shot by Hattie LeBlanc. They don't know that. The prosecution is going to argue, we know she was there. She admits it, plus they find her comb, a handkerchief, and her pen in the office on the blanket. So they have her at the scene. Other evidence they'll present, she ran away. If she was innocent, why would she have taken off and be hiding for 3 days? And then they call Mrs. Glover, and she offers an alibi. She says, at the time of the murder, I was on the phone. I was speaking with someone named Mrs. Freeman. And she's asked, what's her first name? And she said, I was on her phone for 45 minutes speaking with Mrs. Freeman. What's her first name? I don't know, she says. So she's talking 45 minutes to someone but does not know the person's first name. The doctor testifies, the police testify, and they're saying this is what we saw. Okay. The counsel for the defense, an interesting guy, his name is Melvin Johnson. The first mayor of Waltham was a guy named Byron Johnson. Melvin Johnson is his son. He'll go on to become the dean of the BU Law School. So what's his strategy going to be? Well, the first thing he successfully did, the dying declaration, in other words, Clarence saying Hattie LeBlanc did it, is disallowed. So the jury will never hear that. But he's got to throw something out. If it's not her who did it, and of course his alternative theory is Clarence was murdered by Lillian, by his wife. And they call witnesses. Okay, I won't give witnesses' names, but this is some of the testimony. There was a witness that night who saw a woman run from the laundry, and he followed her. And she jumped on the streetcar, he followed her, she got off the streetcar, followed her down Main Street, and where did she go? 428 Main Street, the Glover house. And he was asked, was that Hattie LeBlanc? Was that Henrietta? And he said, I followed a woman, not a girl. Then they call a man named Thomas Coffey. He was studying to be a Catholic priest. He was a seminarian. He was the salesman who sold the gun to Lillian. And he testifies, I sold the gun to her, and she asked me, will this kill a man? They then call the telephone operator. The telephone operator said there were no calls into the Glover house that night, or out of the Glover house. She was not on the phone for 45 minutes with anyone. They then called two witnesses who saw Mrs. Glover on Moody Street. They actually called the cook of the judge appeared at the trial as a witness. She had actually worked for Clarence Glover, and she testified that she saw Mrs. Glover on Moody Street at that time. They called two young men from Waltham who testified that Mrs. Glover at one point approached them and said, would you like me to fix you up with the maid? She charges $5. And there were rumors before this that Lillian Glover had worked in a house of ill repute, but no proof of that. They called Clarence's brother, the dead man's brother. He says that his brother was scared of his wife. He considered her a terror. He one time said, she's going to kill me. He referred to her as, this is what he said Clarence called her, the she-devil. Then they call character witnesses. They have a priest from Nova Scotia. They have people saying that this girl is pure as a driven snow. They call a member of the Canadian Parliament who shows up, who testifies for her. So all these witnesses are coming testifying to her good virtue. In the closing, Melvin Johnson, the defense attorney, he talks for 3.5 hours. He basically, the whole thing is about Mrs. Glover. He calls her a vampire with the morals of a prostitute. And at the end, he said, "Listen, I beg you, while I plead for one, too weak, too young, and too ignorant to plead for herself, a pure, good little girl. All she wants is to go home to Nova Scotia with her father for Christmas." And the jury deliberates, and a quick show of hands. By the way, the case is never, well, I won't tell you that. So how many think the maid did it? How many think Lillian did it? Okay.
Here we go.
The courtroom burst into applause. She was found innocent. I was just in college at the time. I don't know if any of you remember Judge Connolly. He did a presentation on this, and I went to it. And Judge Connolly had known a lot of the people involved. And I went to it. It was down in the Jackson room of the old mill. And I went up to him afterward, and I said, "Judge, who did it? Who do you think did it?" And he said, "There's no question that Lillian did it, but we could never prove it. Lillian will never be brought to trial because the judge will say there's not enough evidence to bring her to trial." So what happened to the principals? Well, Clarence died. What happened to Hattie LeBlanc? She returned to Nova Scotia. She married a man she met at the trial. Wherever the train stopped, as she went up there, she was treated as a celebrity. People were giving her money. And the interesting thing, if I had known that, they were giving her money like, not for that. Sorry about that. The interesting thing, she was alive into the late 70s, and if I had known this, I was teaching at the time, I would have written to her. She was always interested in what happened in Waltham. She had a bunch of kids, she had a bunch of grandkids, so she ended up having a fine life. What happened to Lillian? Never tried for the murder. She remarried. In 1919, she's arrested for shoplifting. She died in 1934. And what happened to the defense attorney, Melvin? He became dean of the BU Law School. So it's an interesting case, and to this day, it has never been conclusively proved who did it, but I think most people think it is Lillian. I do.
Jack shows you why he's such a successful teacher and AP teacher at the high school, and his students do so well. It's a great job. The case I'm doing, I think the next slide shows it, is the Grace Mills case, and it's only slightly more up to date. It's 1927, and it's a case that also went by the name of the Lovers Lane case, or the Waltham Lovers Lane case. It also was called by one newspaper that covered it, and they all covered it, as the Romeo and Juliet case. That's kind of a stretch. But it was a very famous case in 1927, which happens to be the same year as a case I presented a few months ago, the Carbon murder case. I like this case because it's still debatable. I said to Mike Gavin at the high school that he could have his students do this case because there's evidence on both sides, there's witnesses, it depends on the lawyers, and that's what we always looked for at the high school when we had students do mock trials. Much like Jack's case, there's still some question. It's also a case that foreshadows many modern cases. It foreshadows the Michelle Carter case that She was just freed from her sentence for assisted suicide. It particularly foreshadows the In Young Yu case that hasn't come up yet, but in which In Young Yu electronically is talking to her boyfriend or whatever and urges him to jump, which he does, off the BC garage roof to his death. And you'll see how that links in a way, not specifically, but is generally the same kind of case that we're going to be talking about. And finally, it even has touches of the Chuck Stewart case, because there's one version and then another, and that's different completely. And the trial echoes the O.J. Simpson arguments in a way. So to get going, I have the first slide, Jack. Overview of the case, giving it away perhaps a little bit, but that's all right. Girl slain in an automobile, man tries to kill himself. Again, the Boston Globe. They love these cases about Waltham, and we were prominently mentioned many, many times. This is the victim. We'll see another picture of her, and we'll talk about her, just like Jack did about the principals. We'll talk about her, but we'll start by talking about the suspect in the case, and that's Joseph Foster Buckley. If we, that's the best picture we have of him. It's the only picture that appeared in the Globe. The Tribune covered the story but didn't use pictures. So he was from, if we go to the next slide, he was from Nova Scotia. I drew that when I was there. No, when my wife and I went to Nova Scotia. We, Digby Harbor and Digby farms beyond that. That's where he was from, and it was just an excuse to show you a picture I bought. Then he's an itinerant, he's a young fellow, he's an itinerant farmer. He comes to Western Massachusetts. And I had to look twice when I found out where he worked, because it is February, Valentine's Day is coming, and he worked on Love Lane. He worked for a family there. And Weston at that time was all farms, and he lived there too. If we go to the next slide, he lived in a shack, they said. I don't think it was this particular shack. This is a garage, but you got to think in terms of Weston at that time being farmland, and the itinerant workers were from, a lot of them were from Nova Scotia, were from Canada, and were from more rural areas. He comes to the United States in 1923. We'll stay on this for a while, and he's 19 years old. His first job, as I said, Love Lane. I had to go take the picture just to prove there really was a Love Lane, by the way. And he then works for a Marston family on Tower Hill Road, and he meets a fellow named Billy Mills, who's about, he's 19, this fellow's about 20, 21. And Billy Mills says, don't live on the farm. Why don't you come live with us? We have a room to let in our house. We can go to that. Sure enough, it's 51 Morton Street here in Waltham. It's in the Roberts section. It's right behind Bobby Connor's playground, and that's where Bobby lived, in that area. And it's in the same configuration it was back in 1927. They've restored it nicely, and that porch actually eventually becomes the room of Grace Mills, which I'll explain. But in 24, he moves in there, and with the mother, Mr. and Mrs. Mills, mother and father, with a sister, Dorothy, who's 23-ish, with Grace Mills, who's 16, and with Billy Mills, the one who told him about it. Buckley says that as soon as he walked in that house and met Grace Mills, he was 19, she was 16, he said, quote, according to the Globe, I fell in love with Grace the first moment I met her. So, love at first sight. He was accepted at first by the family, and he double dated with Billy and Billy's girlfriend. He double dated with the older sister and her fiance. I think the next slide we can go to. That's her again. And they had a serious relationship. Everyone in the neighborhood thought this was a couple in love. And eventually, he decides he's not going to just double date with Billy Mills and so forth. his car. He buys his own car. He buys a, next slide I think shows, buys a 1920 Roadster, Model T Roadster. And it's a two-seater. I'm told by people on one website that knows more about cars than I do, that this did not have a rumble seat. This was a two-seater, and kind of a primitive car, but Model T was very affordable in those days. So he buys that used, and this is the car that he takes Grace out for drives. I thought I'd stay with this for a minute. A word about cars at this point. We don't think of them this way, perhaps, but older generation, you know, in those days, a car was sinful. A car was, well, you can look at the vocabulary of the 20s, and you can see what they considered cars to be. They were called struggle buggies. They were called hotels on wheels. You don't really think of this, but cultural historians consider that the advent of cars actually created what we know today as modern dating, the phenomenon of modern dating. Because before cars, you went up to the house, you knocked on the door, met the parents, sat on the porch with the parents in the window behind or whatever, that you might get invited into the parlor, you might take a walk to the gazebo at Waltham Common with the parents behind or with others, and everything was chaperoned. To be unchaperoned was, you know, you'd be talked about. Cars changed all that. Now flappers, to use vocab from the 20s, when I taught the 20s, you always had to use the vocabulary. Now flappers are drugstore cowboys, guys with watch fobs that hung around hoping to meet somebody for the night. Could go to a speakeasy, buy hooch, and then drive to a lover's lane or a movie, and intimate relationships were possible, which wasn't the case, you know, really before that. So let's, I have a, go to the next one perhaps. By the way, speaking of flappers, I just found this ad, and it was in the newspaper at the time, and the breath remains sweet as a rose, old gold, the smoother and better cigarette. Not a cough, and a carload. It was supposed to be healthy. And she's dressed as a flapper. My grandmother, Noni, told me flappers, you know, might be floozies, I don't know. She told me they were daring young women who smoked, who drank, who wore short dresses with frills. And generally, she had a disapproving kind of attitude towards them. Let's go back to the house for a second, Jack. 2 back, 3 back. Okay, he's in the house. He gets another job in Weston. This time, he's fired from that job for breaking an axe. So he becomes the unemployed guy in the house. And resentment starts against him. He's considered a ne'er-do-well. He's considered a loafer. And he said he never loafed more than 4 months at a time. Was his defense to that. I didn't think that was the best defense. Eventually, he's asked to leave the house in 1926. Billy turns against them. They're going out to work every day. He's staying home with Grace and the ladies of the house, perhaps, the mother. And she does take in work, but he's forbidden to come calling. That doesn't stop him, though. He drives down the street, the public street. They can't really stop him. He brings his harmonica, he brings his accordion, and he serenades her from the front lawn. He's moved along by them, but the neighbors think that he's being sincere at the time. Around that time, she gets to be very sickly. At first, they think she just has the vapors, which in those days, a fragile lady, women were considered objects, fragile objects, and if they got overly excited or nervous, they'd swoon, they'd faint. And that was a total misdiagnosis. She had a heart condition that turned out to be very serious. She was more or less an invalid. In 1927 now, we're 3 years in, so He's 22, she's 19. She has a birthday, and he's invited. He's psyched. He's invited to come to the house. He gets her an odd gift to me, but probably not that unusual. He gets her a bank book with $5 in it, with $5 stamp, like we used to get in 3rd grade, and from Waltham Savings or whatever. And he's happy then, she's happy about that, he's happy about that. Until she's given another $5 bank book by another man, Nigel Patterson, another man that he didn't know about, shows up, gives her a gift. And then a third guy shows up from Connecticut and writes her poetry and gives it to her in a journal, in a book. And so she's a popular 19-year-old girl at that time. My noni would say floozy. But anyway, no, not really. She's a sweet-looking girl. And around that time, a busybody neighbor said that he said, so she knew him a little because he's the guy with the accordion that's showing up. He said this quote, "I know Grace is for me, and if I can't have her, nobody else ever will." That comes up at the trial. Let's go to October 1927. Foster Buckley, he goes by the name of Joseph Foster Buckley, but he calls himself Foster, so I might use that a lot. Foster Buckley decides to go to the movies. Let's find a movie theater, Jack. There it is. I'd love to say it was the Embassy, but the Embassy didn't open until 1928, the year after. So we've narrowed it down to the Central Square Theater that I went to many times in the 50s because they played B movies, horror movies, Creature of the Black Lagoon, and all those kind of films. And it's right on the corner of Main and Moody. Now it's the part of the Merck apartment complex. He goes to a movie, and he's excited about it because it stars, go to the next one, Jack. I just threw this in extra. It stars Tom Mix, and he was a big star in the 20s and 30s, mostly 20s. And he was a former cowboy, and my mother, who was 102, who I talked to last week about this, she had met him with my grandmother at the stage door of the whatever cinema in in Boston, because in those days stars would appear like between movies. They talked to the audience, and she remembers she loved Tom Mix, even though he was a much older guy, like many of the Western stars back then. He knew Wyatt Earp. I only throw that in to show you how young our country is. I mean, my mother knew someone who knew Wyatt Earp. Wyatt Earp is gunfight at the OK Corral. Wyatt Earp and the Clantons fought it out right after the Civil War. And, Wyatt Earp lived until 1929. He was a pallbearer. So, back to our story. But anyway, he goes to the City Hall diner and says to the owner of the diner, it's a City Hall diner, but it's Newton City Hall diner. And he says to him, I could shoot as well as Tom Mix. I could outdraw him. Could you get me a gun? And the guy says, okay. It's the 1920s. It's not that unusual. And this fellow says, yeah, I'll let you know, but I can get you a gun. And he then, let's go to the crime itself. Is that the next one, Jack? Yep. Okay. It's a little bit ahead of us, but that's fine. I have no particular slide for this, so it's just information. On November 15th, 1927, a very busy day for Foster Buckley. At noon, he goes to see her. She's, by this time, because of her heart condition, she's been moved to the porch. In those days, anything's wrong with your asthma or heart, anything, they say, get fresh air. And she's actually, she's living in the porch, and even though it's November 15th. And he goes to see her and talks to her and says, I can't take it anymore. I'm going to go to Vermont, and I'm going to leave tonight. If you want to elope with me, meet me at the old paper mill at midnight. And they talk back and forth about it because she's undecided. She says to him that I can't live without you, but I don't think I'm in good enough health to do it. I might not be able to join you, they talk back and forth. They even perhaps, according to him, they even perhaps talk about a suicide pact if she can't really make it. Either way, they say, well, I'm going there tonight. I mean, he says, I'm going tonight. I'll be there at midnight. Now he goes to Newton, to the diner, and he gets the gun. The fella has found the gun, has got himself a gun, and he gets the gun that's used in the crime or used in the incident. He's got hours and hours to kill, so here goes his reputation right down the drain. He calls a buddy up, his last name was Smith, and he and Smitty meet two flappers, or I could be meaner and say dumb-doors, from, to use a 20s term, don't accuse me of gender, that was a term back then. He and his friend take two Irish maids from Newton out for joyriding for 3 or 4 hours. The same day he's going to meet her at midnight. He drops them off around 11 o'clock. He shows up at the paper mill, which is on Route 30, and on this site stood the Roberts Paper Mill, prominent example of thriving industry in Waltham in the 19th and early 20th century. So, right on Route 30, I don't suggest taking a picture because cars are bombing by, but I wanted to show you the location. It's quite a walk for her from Morton Street. For a sickly person, half mile, maybe a mile, I don't know, half mile maybe. He says she walked there, they met, and his version we'll get to during the trial, but what we know officially is that they drove from there to a lover's lane on Hurd's Pond. And trying to find Hurd's Pond was a little difficult. It's on the Sudbury line, and that's actually where the crime or the incident occurs. So it's a Waltham girl, but she meets her fate at Hurd's Pond. Now, trying to find it, we look it up, and the next slide shows you like the Google version of Hurd's Pond. It's still there. I might have gone by it. I took a back road the other day, back from Lincoln-Sudbury basketball game, and I went by a pond. But when I on the next slide, I did find it, and that's the exact area where it happened. It's a couple 100-yard dirt area that was used as a lover's lane then, overlooking Hurd's Pond. All we know is around 1:30, according to the coroner later on, she is shot, and his version is that she shot herself in her left area of her chest, in her left breast. And she is then shot a second time, just sticking with what happened. She shot a second time, and the coroner believes within a short amount of time after the first shot, she shot in the center or right portion of the torso. Just sticking to the facts, the next thing that happens is, go ahead, Jack. At 6:30 in the morning, he pulls up, not to Kevin's quick mark, by the way, but he pulls up to the corner of Ridge Street and Main Street and shoots himself. He is seen by a couple of pedestrians. He gets out of the car. He shoots himself in the left shoulder, left chest area. He's conveniently, perhaps some would say, about a half a mile from Waltham Hospital, and he survives. But he is badly shot, but the two pedestrians call the police, and an officer, Michael Duffy, comes, and now you can hold it there for a second. Michael Duffy comes, and he walks up to the incident, to the man on the street. He's still alive. Then he looks in the car. The pedestrians hadn't, and there's a dead body in the car. She's dead in the car. And it's 6:30 the next morning. So he says, what happened here? And he says, she shot herself, and then I shot her, and then I shot myself. So Officer Duffy thinks it all happened there, then. He calls the hospital. They go to the hospital. I didn't have a hospital picture from those days, but you probably had one, Jack. You could have lent me. And at the hospital, Officers Asa McKenna, who later becomes a chief, and Peter Tracy question him. Now, Peter Tracy is an interesting officer. I don't know if it's related to Paul Tracy. I should have contacted Paul to come by or ask him, but he's a policeman in Waltham. But he was in the last case I talked about. He was the man in the last case who found Furneaux, the watchman at the car barn, and Furneaux said, according to Tracy, said, Boudreaux, 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 and actually he was saying Devereaux, Devereaux, Devereaux. But he was at the death scene of the other case in 1927. Here he is here, and he takes this statement in the hospital in front of doctors and nurses, and again, Foster Buckley repeats that she shot herself. She begged me to finish it. She begged me to kill her. And then I guess she assumed he was going to kill himself. So I did that to put her out of her misery, and then I drove back here to kill myself. Let's try to go to the next slide, maybe, Jack. The car becomes an important issue. The police search the car, and first of all, it doesn't gel. The stories don't gel because there's an extra bullet hole in the car. She is shot twice in the car. That's undeniable because of the blood and so forth, even though the bullet's lodged in her. But there's a hole through the floorboards. And he has to change his story when he's questioned about that. Peter Tracy goes to Lover's Lane there, and he finds the bullet with a bit of fragment from the floorboard. He finds her hat, and he finds the bullet casing. So there's no doubt that somehow a shot was there. And he changes his story. He says, well, yeah, I did show her the gun. When we decided to commit suicide, she didn't know how to handle a gun. So she got out of the car, and she didn't want to look, and shielded her face and shot the bullet. And it went into the open door of the car and went through the floorboard. We then got back into the car, and she shot herself, and then I shot her because she begged me to do that. They don't buy it. Next slide, I think, Jack. They don't buy it. They arrest him for murder, for murdering her. Youth faces murder charge for shooting sweetheart. Buckley, who shot himself and may not live, says Grace Mills inflicted. It's interesting about the death declaration. It was allowed in this case. In this case, he did live, and it really wasn't as grievous a shot as some of the nurses thought or some of the people thought. And so anything he said was allowed to be said in the case, and really didn't help him at all. That's the death car, as they called it. Eventually, and the jury goes to see that car. They actually take the seat of that car out and bring it into the trial. That's Grace Mills. Next slide. So he's going to be put on trial. Just like Jack said, in those days, they put the names of every single juror, their address. They tell you which one is the foreman. They don't put the phone numbers because in those days there weren't phone numbers. You just called an operator and said, I'm going to speak to Mr. Smith on Randolph Road or whatever. And it's all male. Let's go to the trial itself. Joseph Buckley is accused of the murder. The prosecution charges him with first-degree murder. And, I'll make it brief, even though I was, in my course, criminal law, we'd go into, greater detail. But I'll quote from the opening, the prosecution, that he planned to kill her with the guns and the threats, that they struggled, that he tried to shoot her with her first shot, but she deflected his hand. I don't know how they know that for sure, but that's what their, that's what how they saw it. That she deflected his hand and the bullet went through the floorboard. He then shot her twice from point-blank range, then eventually drove back to Waltham and shot himself just to back up his suicide story. So that's the prosecution version. And just like Jack, I won't go into every witness, but by name, but the policemen were called. the statement he made was, backed up by the policemen, the ER doctors, and nurses. Remember, he said she shot herself and then I shot her. The medical examiner was important because he said the 2 shots were fired in rapid succession, one after another, and kind of changes his story slightly. Joseph Nagel, the guy who sold him the gun, gives the testimony. And by the way, Nagel said to him, why do you need this gun? And he said, I'm going to Vermont. It's dangerous. It's lonely, country roads. And the busybody, Helen Fuller, the one in the neighborhood who he said, if I can't have her, no one else will. They're called. The 2 flappers are called, Peggy Cullen and Edith McLean. At 11 o'clock, he said to them, I got to get gas. I got a date at midnight with a girl that's mine, all mine. That kind of backfired on the prosecution because, it proves that he loved her and it backs up that part. Dorothy Mills, Grace's sister, is called, and she also knew that he used to say, if I don't have her, no one will. Grace's mother, one of the highlights of the trial is when Grace's mother is called. She visits him at the hospital, and she says, she testifies about visiting him and saying, did you do this? And he said, I only did it because she begged me to. And the defense makes a mistake because you don't ask a question that you don't know the answer to, or you could be hurt by the answer. The defense says, says to the mother, did your daughter love that man, or did he love her? That's what she says. She says, did he, Foster Buckley, love Grace? And the mother says, with a steely-eyed leer, you don't murder someone you love. And at that point, the lawyer just sat down, and that ended the prosecution case. Defense, I guess we'll go to the next slide, Dan. The defense is very short of witnesses. They call his sister and the Mills neighbors, and they all said it, they loved each other. They were very much in love. They believe the suicide pact story. They call their own ballistic expert and say, yeah, it's very possible that it happened separate shots. Could have happened by accident. A nurse from the hospital, I give her credit. She says that he cried. He was crying. I want to be with Grace. I want to be with Grace. He thought he was dying, she said. She stood up for him, whereas all the others didn't. And that's her picture again, same picture as before. Go to the next slide. That's my mom. I just kind of explaining why I like this case. Do they look alike? Go back a second, Jack. Let's not leave the picture of my mom on there. Don't tell her if you meet her. I don't know how I'm going to explain. When I show her this, I don't know how I'm going to explain it. But let's go to the next slide. And dead girl's mother asked the truth of Buckley. I already talked about that. Chateau, Jack. Oh, no, that's not. That's a different place. Huntington Avenue. Huntington Avenue. I know you'd be excited by that. Let's go to the next one. And this one is kind of unusual. I was looking for an article on the case. And it's just before the end of the case. And here's an article on Buckley. But I had to be drawn to this article here. Go to the next one, if you would. just out of interest, Maine baby weighs 18 and a half pounds. Housework as usual for the mother. It goes through the weight and so forth, and the last sentence is, the mother did her housework as usual. Different times then. All right, as far as the defense, Buckley taking the stand was the big moment. Buckley tries to explain things. Go to the next slide. And he takes the stand in his own defense. I give him credit for that. Did Hattie take the stand? No. He tries to explain things. He does change the story for the second or third time. He says that Grace fired the practice shot. They struggled for the gun. As soon as they got back in the car, Grace shot herself by mistake or in that struggle. He struggled to grab the gun, and it went off again by accident, and she was shot twice. And they did a demonstration. They brought the car seat in, the buddy car seat, from the death car, as they called it in the Globe. And 2 lawyers acted out, and the Globe was not convinced, neither was the Tribune. It was a non-convincing story. So, and he can't remember what he did after that. He can't explain, his actions. So, let's go to the closings just to end the trial. Defense called it a coerced confession. Buckley, having shot himself, this is a quote, having shot himself in sorrow, suffering from a probable fatal wound, with dope injected in him in the torture room of Waltham Hospital, was talked in confessing. He was framed. Sounds like the O.J. Simpson successful somehow defense. The prosecution is a kind of an O.J. prosecution. He says, to quote, to find him innocent, you'd have to believe that every policeman lied, that Grace's family lied, that all the medical help lied, that Helen Fuller, the busybody, lied, that he accidentally shot Grace, even though he couldn't remember it today on the stand, and that this innocent man then drove around with Grace's dead body for 4 hours because he was confused and upset. He ends it, you try to be dramatic when you end, he ends it with, be honest to the defendant, but be honest to the poor dead girl. Be honest to yourselves, and return a verdict that you can live with for the rest of your life. Judge Dubuque says to them, which I'll say to you, there's 3 possible answers here, 3 possible charges, verdicts that you can give. If you believe he set out to kill her that night, that's murder in the first degree, premeditation, intent to kill at the time of the attack. If you believe he aided her suicide in any way, that at some point he took the law into his own hands, and assisted suicide was illegal then, and he shot her, not with premeditation, but he shot her to kill her at the time, that's murder in the second degree. Or if you think her death was accidental, or you are not sure beyond a reasonable doubt of what happened in the car, you could, if you think it was a tragic accident, you'd be obliged to vote not guilty. So, based on my version of it, and of course it's much more, but how many would say murder in the first degree? A few hands. That he planned it, that's the gun and the whole thing. How many would say murder in the second degree? I anticipated that. And how many would say not proven? So, sufficiently. That's why I say it's a debatable case. That's why I'd love to see a mock trial of this. Sometimes I go up and be the judge for Mike Gavin, who does that course now. And go ahead, Jack, let's go with the verdict. Final arguments? No, go to the next one. He's found guilty of murder in the second degree. Now, at first glance, you think first degree because guilty of murder, but gets a life term. But this is 1920s. Remember what happened to the 3 guys that I talked about the last time. They were convicted. 2 of them were just in a car waiting for the other gangster they were with who killed somebody. And all 3 were executed in the last triple execution in Massachusetts history. In this case, he's found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. I tried to look him up, see if he died in prison or when he eventually got out. Shocked to see the next 10 years later, 1938, this Governor Hurley decides to pardon 5 men: an ice pick murderer, a murderer by poison, a robber, a fence, and Joseph Foster Buckley. He goes free in 10 years, where those other 3 men I just mentioned were executed for something. And Hurley was a lame duck governor. He was controversial, and was involved with James Michael Curley a little bit. Curley's coming back into the office, so I don't have a slide of it, but a month later, he pardoned 6 or 7 other people, and one of them I looked up. I saw the list of names, didn't think I'd seen a name I knew, but one of the names was a young Raymond Patriarca. So who, eventually establishes the mafia here in New England. And $1,950 was given in that case to the pardon commissioner, who goes to jail for accepting almost $2,000 for the pardon. And did half of it go to the governor or something? I don't know. But that's the case of, John Foster Buckley and the Grace Mills murder case. Now, you might think that criminals are sophisticated. The criminals, they're whodunits. Not usually. And our last case is going to be presented by Detective Jim Auld, and I think it kind of shows that sometimes criminals are just evil, and they're not very, they're incredibly inept at times also. So Jimmy, would you present that case? That'd be great.
Okay, these guys are tough acts to follow, you know what I mean? Teachers, educators. I was a cop, so cut me a little slack, I want to thank Debbie Hoffman for allowing this to go on. It's a great program, and she even made sure I got a new library card. I'm psyched. Anyway, good evening. The crime that I investigated happened like 30 years ago, so I definitely need some notes. It was funny looking at those old pictures, Jack, of the football team. Was that John Graceffa in that picture? Pretty sure it was. Number 48, I think he was. Sorry, 44. I'm a little under the pressure. The detective who took my place, Danny McDougal, is sitting right there. He's going to grade me tonight, so I'm a little nervous. Anyway, good evening. My name is Jimmy Auld. I'm a lifelong resident of Waltham. I want to thank Steve Goodwin for putting this program, Wicked Waltham, together, and for inviting me to come and talk about a very disturbing case that I investigated back in July of 1990, July 9th, to be exact. It was one of the many troubling and upsetting cases I was involved in during my 38-year career in the Waltham Police Department. I wish it was funnier, like a couple of the other cases we just heard, but unfortunately, it really wasn't very funny at all. Speaking of which, I became a Waltham police officer on February 14th of 1980. Prior to becoming a police officer, I served as a correctional officer at the Billerica House Correction for the Middlesex County Sheriff's Department for 5 years. My dad was a police officer. My brother was a police officer in the state police. I've been married 42 years to my beautiful wife, Deb. And I've survived 5 daughters. A couple of them are here, but anyway. I remember Monday, July 9th, 1990, very well. Why? I don't know, it's not the only case that comes back to my mind sometimes when I'm just driving around, but it definitely does come back to me at times. I remember it was a beautiful summer afternoon. The sun was shining. It was just a really nice day. And I had just very recently been promoted to the detective division because I had been working nights in patrol for many years in various capacities. And I had been assigned to the investigation of crimes committed by or upon children. That was what I was supposed to be doing. I also was assigned to register and monitor registered sex offenders in our community. So I had a pretty full plate. I was working with Detective Dick Scanlon at the time. I don't know if many people know him, but he was a great mentor and a great friend to me, especially when I first got on in the detective division. Sometime in that afternoon of July 9th, I was suddenly made aware of an assault that had been reported up in Prospect Hill Park. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Prospect Hill Park. Patrol officers had already responded. Abby, do you want to do the... Patrol officers had already responded And so I jumped in my unmarked car and made my way up with blue lights and the siren. And I was directed to a location by patrol officers who had located a 41-year-old woman. I'm going to just refer to her as Donna because even back then, she did not want her name publicized, and I respect her for that. And so I'm just going to call her Donna. She was a 41-year-old woman from Pepperell who was lying off the side of one of the main roads running through Prospect Hill Park, down a little ways on a trail heading northwesterly, pretty much left to die in an area surrounded by some bushes with several very large boulders and rocks situated next to where she was lying. So this is the trail here that she actually started walking down, which is off of off the main driveway which goes through Prospect Hill Park. So she had decided she was going to take this little path which led back to Totten Pond Road area where her office was, and she was off walking during her lunch break. So it wasn't like it was at night. It was like, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, beautiful day. She's walking during her lunch break. And anyway, one of the first things I noticed when I arrived at the scene was the enormous amount of blood in the area. And it was splattered on several of the large rocks right near where Donna was lying. The patrol officers were trying to tend to her very serious head and facial injuries, while the ambulance services were speeding to the area to assist. Upon seeing the victim, I seriously thought this was a fatality, definitely a murder. I didn't want to screw it up. It was like one of the first big cases I got. Being in the detective's office, I was like, oh my God, I hope I do everything right here. She had enormous injuries to her face and head with a great deal of blood loss. Her nose had literally been displaced. It was on another side of her face, like over here somewhere. She had what appeared to be at least a broken arm or wrist, and several of her fingers were literally facing backwards and totally dislocated and broken. There were areas of her scalp where it appeared clumps of hair had been pulled from her head. And in fact, I did find a couple of mounds of small mounds of hair on the trail, right near where Donna was found. That's actually the area where she was found lying. The main road would have been like up in here, but the trail was coming down this way, and that's where she was found. I'm going to get into that a little bit more, but she had cuts and contusions on her legs, elbows, and she was totally dirty from being dragged about the area. I noticed pieces of what looked like headphones lying about the area and some kind of a cassette player that was in pieces. There were definite drag marks on the trail and the dirt leading up to the main road, but then turning off into this bushy area, which was just up there on the screen, where Donna had basically been left to die. So there was uniformed officers there, myself, some ambulance people, and I tried to have any kind of conversation with Donna that I could as they were boarding her into the ambulance. And all she kept saying to me was, "Is he gone? I don't want to die." And I remember her saying to me, "I'm a single mom and I have 2 little boys who need me." And I remember she grabbed my arm and she kept saying, "Please don't let me die. I'm a good person." And I remember when she grabbed my arm, I noticed in her fingernails was hair, like reddish brown hair. And it was really obvious. Like, I'm not that astute, so, it was almost like that she wanted me to see something, and I saw it, and I actually took the hair from her fingernails. And I was wearing a windbreaker at the time, and I didn't have any, evidence containers or anything. I just stuck them in my pocket. I'm like, I hope I don't lose those, But I didn't know what else to do. I was just, trying to control the situation as best as I could. I noticed at this time that she had some kind of a flexible wire around her wrist, and there was a long piece that was unattached, as if the perpetrator had probably tried to tie her hands together, but he had been unable to do so. So I removed the wire from her wrist to prevent it from being lost at the hospital or something like that, because I knew it was going to be part of this case. I was able to, I already said I was able to move hair from her fingernails. She was transported to the hospital, at which time I was able to take many pictures of the area. And I'm not a great photographer, but I was trying to do the best I could. A couple of days later, I actually went up there with somebody who's been trained in photography so we could take better pictures. But I wanted to make sure I got pictures right at that moment, because it was clear that there was a struggle that you could see in the dirt and around the area. So I took many pictures and I collected numerous articles of evidence that I would eventually turn over to the Middlesex County District Attorney's Office. I remember I collected broken pieces of headphones and a broken cassette player, clumps of Donna's pulled out hair, one of her sneakers that had been pulled off during her struggle with the person who assaulted her, and the sneaker was an off-white color but completely smudged now with dirt and grime from being knocked to the ground and dragged in what appeared at the scene to have been quite a struggle. I located a small round spool of flexible wire near the bushes, the same type of wire I had just removed from Donna's wrist. I also located a roll of duct tape and a heavy pair of vice grips splattered with blood that were lying in the bushes near the path. Donna had been, the path that Donna had actually been assaulted on. I found them lying in the bushes there. It was hard to determine any particular set of footprints because it appeared obvious Donna had put up an enormous fight for her life. Probably the only reason why she survived this very violent and what should have been a deadly assault. We talked with several people who were walking in the area that day, and the three young women who had been walking and actually discovered Donna lying on the side of the road. They were petrified, crying, emotionally distraught, but could only add that they saw her, tried to help her. One of them ran to her car to call the police while the others remained nearby with Donna. While I was at the scene of the assault, unbelievably, our department received a teletype from the Massachusetts State Police Barracks located on the Mass Pike in Weston. And as Mr. Goodwin pointed out, some of these guys aren't too bright. They reported on a teletype that a white male with reddish-brown hair had just entered their barracks and asked to use the men's room. The young trooper who was working the front desk reported to his supervisor that this guy just walked in covered with blood, and he appeared agitated and he was sweating. So I was notified of this teletype, and I advised our department to inform the state police sergeant, Jack Cunningham, who everyone called him Scrap Iron Cunningham. He said, make sure you detain this guy until I get there. Don't let him walk out the door. So, of course, they did, you know. I didn't ask how, just do what I ask, you know. And I immediately left the scene of Prospect Hill Park and with blue lights and siren made my way to the Mass State Police Barracks in Weston. I was met there by Sergeant Cunningham, who brought me to a waiting area where I was introduced to 31-year-old Raymond H. McCormick, Jr. This guy was from Connecticut, and he had been just like bouncing around, sleeping in his car, all over the place. He's a bum. I introduced myself to McCormick, who immediately said to me, "Is she dead?" I immediately placed him under arrest at this point for assault with intent to murder, pending other further charges. Before I left the state police barracks, I completed a search of McCormick's vehicle, which was a blue Ford Fairmont. Inside, I found pornographic adult magazines, and I remember that there were receipts and food wrappers that were being used as bookmarks for particularly graphic pornographic pictures, some involving bondage and violent sexual acts. I located duct tape that matched the same type as had been located at the scene of the assault, as well as more of the same flexible wire found at the scene, a length of nylon rope, and a shirt that was saturated in blood that McCormick was wearing at the time of the assault. I also found a Polaroid instant camera that had an unused roll of film in it, as well as the packaging for the film and a receipt from a CVS in Framingham. At this time, I transported McCormick back to the Waltham Police Department for booking and to advise him of his Miranda rights and attempt to conduct an interview with McCormick. But on the ride back, he was like motor mouth, talking, which I didn't stop him, you know. On our ride back, he kept making many unsolicited comments to me that were later challenged by the defense attorney in the case, but which were allowed and judged as appropriately obtained. I might have mentioned to him once, you know, you don't have to talk to me if you don't want, but if you want to. And he asked me several times, is she dead or what? You know, tell me the truth. Is she dead? And I told him I really didn't know her condition. He started telling me, I didn't even know how long I was in the park, but the next thing I knew, I was looking at some girl with blood all over her. And she kept yelling at me, my head, why are you hurting me? He told me, I know what I did. I tried to kill her. I was the one doing this to her. And all I wanted for her was to lay down in the back of my car, and she wouldn't. Then he started laughing. I remember he started laughing. He said, she kneed me right in the nuts once, too. He was chuckling about what a fight she put up. Once at the station and following my explanation of his Miranda rights to him, McCormick told me, I do crazy, stupid things when I'm drunk. I need to stop drinking. The funny thing was, he hadn't been drinking. There was no sign of alcohol in his breath. He seemed completely sober, and the state police basically said the same thing. So he told me that he was totally out of breath and he was scared, and all he really wanted to do was get help for her after the assault. Guy was crackers, obviously, but he then told me that he wanted to talk to a lawyer and that he was through talking to me and didn't want to participate in any more conversation. At that point, he was placed in a cell, and the charges against him were amended to 3 counts of assault with intent to murder, assault with intent to rape, and assault and battery with a dangerous weapon, multiple counts. At this time, I contacted the Middlesex County District Attorney's Office and spoke with Assistant District Attorney George Murphy to advise him of what had taken place and what my actions had been to this point. And let me tell you something, I was so happy that George Murphy was going to be the district attorney on this case, because the guy was a maniac. He was the best DA we had, and I knew I'm in good hands. Even if I messed up or something, George would fix it, you know? He was just a really good DA. All the evidence I collected was turned over to the Mass State Police Crime Lab. I later learned that pubic hairs from McCormick had been found on the victim's clothing, and that the hairs found in Donna's fingernails actually matched the hair of McCormick, especially his scraggly beard that he had. So I called George Murphy once again, and we were able to obtain a search warrant and to go into the cell and take samples of his beard, again, more samples, and also of his pubic hair, which he wasn't too happy about. And I wasn't real thrilled with it either. But, you know, we got it done. And down the line, it was a good thing, because it all came back positive. By the time I had the opportunity to speak with the victim in the case, Donna, she had been transferred into Mount Auburn Hospital. I entered her room, and she literally looked like a mummy. She was like bandaged. All you could see was her eyes like this. She had received somewhere in the area of 75 to 100 stitches in her face and head, had undergone surgery to reattach and correct her nose, which had been badly injured. She had suffered a broken orbital bone around one of her eyes, and she had lost several teeth. She suffered a broken wrist and had 3 to 4 severely broken fingers. She was very emotional and crying. She kept saying to me, "I really thought I had died and I was looking up into heaven. I swear to God," that's what she said. She told me she worked at Autographics and was a tech writer. This company was located along Taunton Pond Road, and Donna was out during her lunch break for her daily walk. She said she had been walking through Prospect Hill Park by herself and had been walking along the main road leading through the park. She told me that she did see a guy standing off of the main road somewhat into the woods, but she didn't really pay too much attention to him and isn't sure that it was the same guy who assaulted her. But at one point, she decided to take a smaller path through the woods leading out towards Taunton Pond Road. I think there was a picture of that path. Yes, that one. That was leading out towards Taunton Pond Road. Now, my daughter Abby and I walked it, and it actually takes you to like Marshall's. You can get to Marshall's there. I told my wife, she's like, "Oh, let's go for a walk there." Anyway, she said she recalled seeing a blue car parked near this path, but right along the main road. So the main road's like this, then there's a little path that cuts off. The car was parked right at that intersection, and it was a blue car that obviously fit the description of the suspect. Nobody was in the car. Donna was wearing a small headphones and listening to a cassette tape as she started down the smaller, less traveled path. And this really creeped me, the way she explained it. She said that for whatever reason, she could feel or hear somebody running up behind her. And as she turned to her right, he was already on her and started smashing her in the head in the face with something metal, which turned out to be the vice grips. She said he kept hitting her, wrestling with her, trying to knock her to the ground. She said she began fighting him, scratching him, and I did observe on him he had pretty violent scratch marks on his neck, so she got him pretty good. She was trying to kick him, but he was like crazy. She said he got her to the ground and kept trying to get her hands behind her back, but she continued to fight, but she knew she was badly hurt. She said he started trying to drag her over to what she believed to be his car, but he was unable to get her there. He rolled her into an area just off the path under some bushes, and she said he began grabbing the back of her head and slamming it into a boulder that was there a whole bunch of times, and she thinks she may have passed out or become unconscious at one point, but she told me that he was definitely lying on top of her for a while because she said she could recall him sweating on her and breathing heavily on her. For whatever reason, he got up and left, and she heard his car drive off, leaving her there. So as I said, the case was given to Assistant District Attorney George Murphy to prosecute. At the time, George was, in my opinion, the best ADA we had, and so I was thrilled that he had been assigned the case. George was a tough guy. And he was my wife told me to tone this down because we used to go out with him after work sometimes. You know, he'd come out with us, and he was a hard partier, good guy. But he showed up for court the next morning. Man, he was ready for battle. I'll tell you, he was good, and always prepared. He was always given the toughest cases in Middlesex County. The defense attorney that was assigned to the case was a girl by the name of Joanne Springer, and she was a good attorney. I never liked if I had a case and I saw that Joanne was the defense attorney. She was fair, she didn't play dirty, but I'll tell you, she was tough. And she did her job to the best of her ability with no hard feelings. But I know Joanne was assigned to defend Raymond McCormick Jr. She didn't ask for the case, and I'm pretty sure she didn't really want the case. But it was her job to defend her client to the best of her ability. She never attempted to say McCormick didn't commit this crime. The only defense she could provide was the defense of insanity, that he was crazy, which did not go well with George Murphy. He did not like that. And this made ADA Murphy crazy mad, and he and Joanne would have incredibly loud verbal arguments in the lobby of Cambridge Superior Court. I'm telling you, it was comical, but it was scary. They did not like each other. And actually, one time we were on the elevator going down from the courtroom, and I had to get between them because I seriously thought they were going to start throwing punches at each other. But to make a very long story short, ADA George Murphy prevailed in a jury trial, demanding that all the jurors board a bus. He made all the jurors board a bus and drive to Prospect Hill Park to view the actual scene of the assault. And he was admonished by the judge for trying to make me reenact the assault as dramatically as I could. You're like, no, act like it really hurt and fall. I'm like, George, I can't do that. And the judge even said, we'll have none of that. But I'm going to stop right there and ask, do you think this guy was found guilty? Is this like 100%? Because there were a lot of challenges in the case. Challenges to the statements that I got, challenges to the way I obtained the evidence. It wasn't properly stored. It wasn't this. It wasn't that. Excuse me?
You put in your windbreaker?
I kind of skipped that part, you know. But no, they challenged a lot, and but anyway, do you have that? Yeah. They brought in a doctor who said he was crackers, you know, and so he was found guilty. But the one funny spin on this whole thing is, and I tell my wife this story all the time, is that District Attorney George Murphy and Joanne Springer fought through the whole case. And I saw George a couple of years after that case, and he said to me, he goes, Jim, I got to thank you for introducing me to Raymond McCormick and giving me that case. I'm like, why? He goes, because I married Joanne Springer. And that's the truth.
You might want to mention that he was sentenced to what? How many?
Oh, he got 30 years at Concord State Prison, and George was not happy about that. Because he asked for 50, and they only gave him 30, and George put up a hoot and a holler about that, but he's, you know what, he's scheduled to get out soon. So,